One example where Jewish law, religion has actually stagnated and is not advancing, is not in a process of progress and development, is the laws of ritual slaughter, Shechita. So first of all, the laws of ritual slaughter are actually an invention of the sages, Chazal. The sages invented ritual slaughter because in the Torah itself, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 17, verse 13, it says, "And any man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among them, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood." In other words, it is possible to hunt an animal, to take a bow and arrow and hunt the animal, and ritual slaughter is not mentioned at all. Even Esau was a hunter with his mouth, and he brought from his hunting to his father Isaac. That is, according to the Bible, it was possible to hunt an animal, bring it home and eat it. So the sages came and, of course, invented the made-up phrase, "This is a law given to Moses at Sinai." In other words, they invented the oral Torah, and for anything that has no basis in the written Torah, they say, "This is a law given to Moses at Sinai." And so ritual slaughter is considered a law given to Moses at Sinai. All well and good up to this point. Because the sages invented it, we know that the sages invented a new covenant. But what really bothers me about ritual slaughter, because as we move forward, ritual slaughter causes a tremendous amount of suffering to animals, to the cow, the calf, the lamb, the sheep, the bird. And this suffering is not only from the act of slaughter itself, but even after the cut, until the animal dies, it suffers. And even before that, it suffers because it understands it is about to be slaughtered. The way they are transported is extremely cruel. I have been to a slaughterhouse, and you can see the stress of the animals there in the slaughterhouse. Now, aside from this reality that slaughter causes suffering, especially in our era today, when we can cause less suffering to animals by stunning them, by numbing them beforehand. And there are truly modern and effective methods to ease the suffering of animals. But the mindset is frozen, it stands still, it remains the same as it was 2,000 years ago. We go backwards and continue to slaughter, even though consciously Jewish law acknowledges the fact that slaughter causes suffering to animals. This is in contrast to rabbis who try to claim, "No, our slaughter is humane and causes less suffering." Not at all. The religion never intended to cause less suffering to animals. And I will prove this claim simply by reading from the halachic rulings of the Shulchan Aruch. I am reading this from a chapter in the book, "The Religion Has Turned Against Its Creators," which discusses the issue of animal suffering. And one of the sections on animal suffering is about slaughter. So why do I conclude that the halachic authorities, the religious figures, recognize and are aware that slaughter causes suffering? So I will read from Tractate Chulin, page 21 AI. How should I say it? This page. Tractate Chulin 21a, side B. Whoever wants to eat from an animal before its soul departs, that is, a person who slaughters a calf or a sheep or a lamb and wants to cut the meat before it dies, after the slaughter, but before it dies, because they believed the meat is tastier that way. Whoever wants to eat from an animal before its soul departs after the slaughter cuts an olive-sized piece. He cuts from the chest area before its soul departs, according to the strictest interpretation. So you cut an olive-sized piece of meat from the place of slaughter, salt it thoroughly, wash it thoroughly, and then you wait patiently until its soul departs. Then it is permitted to eat the piece. They have no problem causing suffering to the animal. Another point which is written in the Shulchan Aruch is that it is preferable to wait until after the slaughter, because until its soul departs, until it dies, it takes time, and during that time after the slaughter it suffers. It suffers. I haven't measured how long, but it suffers. And they were aware of the suffering, the halakhic authorities. And that's why the Shulchan Aruch says that some say it's advisable to break its neck after the slaughter, or to kill it, to perform an act of killing by stabbing a knife into its heart in order to hasten its death. In other words, they are aware that after the slaughter it takes time for it to die. That means it is caused to suffer. And then he goes on to say, stab a knife into its heart to hasten its death. And he doesn't say to hasten its death in order to reduce its suffering, but rather so that blood won't remain in the animal's organs. And this is found in the Shulchan Aruch, Yored De'ah, section 27, paragraph 3. Now, another halacha that shows how much they were indifferent, at least when it comes to slaughter. There are cases where they are less indifferent, but in the case of slaughter, they were indifferent to the suffering of the animals. And some of the laws of Shechita that the sages established, for example, that you can take a knife and it doesn't even have to be sharp. You can even take a stone as long as it doesn't have a nick. So the shochet checks the knife with his fingernail to see if there is a nick or not. He simply runs his fingernail along the blade to see if it's damaged. If there is any snag, that's called a nick in the knife, and then the knife is not valid for shechita. But if he runs his finger along it, and even if it's not sharp but rather dull, like a dull stone, if you run your finger and there is no nick, then it is written in the Shulchan Aruch that you can move and use this stone or this dull knife all day long as you keep moving it continuously. Now just imagine the suffering of the animal, and they have no problem with it. They don't say, no, don't do this, it's animal suffering. No, he moves it back and forth all day long. So what kind of humanity are you babbling about? Now what bothers me is that the sages actually invented the laws of Shechita. Maybe you could say they invented it because stabbing is suffering for animals. So at that time, Shechita was perhaps the least painful in terms of animal suffering. If that's the case, just as the sages changed from hunting to Shechita, it can be changed today as well. What is this cruel slaughter when now we have methods that make it much, much easier so that within half a second the animal no longer feels any pain? Why don't you do that? Because you're stuck in your ways. You're still living life as if it were 2,000 years ago. And that's also the reason why the religion is irrelevant, meaningless for modern life. One of the questions I always ask is, what everyday question do you have, something you really want to know the answer to, that would make you go and open the Talmud? There isn't a single question, not in medicine, not in education, not in security, not in government, not in economics, not in science, not in astronomy, not in biology, not in botany, nothing. There isn't a single question in any area of life here where you would say, oh, interesting, let's open the Gemara, maybe there's an answer, because you already know in advance that they're just babbling in all these fields.